If you're living in Southeast Asia, you might have heard about the company called Grab. How did a small company in Southeast Asia beat out a big player like Uber and DoorDash? When we think about Grab, we think about ride hailing and food delivery, a taxi app, a delivery app, but that framing is already outdated. The more accurate way to think about Grab is that it has three pillars working together as one system: taxis, food, and finance. In the West, those pillars are separate companies. We can think of Uber for transport, DoorDash for food, and PayPal for payments. In Southeast Asia, they can live inside one app. That's the difference. That's not cosmetic. It changes how users behave, how big data is digital gold, and ultimately how value is being created. So the real question is not whether Grab is the best company for delivery. The question is, when an app like Grab becomes a super app in a rapidly growing region that's embedded into the system of your everyday life, how big of an investment opportunity does that eventually become? We already know one thing that's important. Grab has been battle tested. Global companies entered Southeast Asia with scale, capital, and branding power, and they lost. This pattern is not unique. If we think about Alibaba beating eBay in China, Didi beating Uber in China, and now Chinese EV makers are beating German companies in their own segment. The lesson is consistent. In Asia, scale alone is not the advantage. Local execution is, because people here are different. And no matter how much you read about spreadsheets, you won't understand how things really work until you experience it for yourself. Grab won because it understood the realities on the ground, making sure that pickup points actually existed, photos with instructions that tell you exactly where to wait for your drivers, and digital payments that don't actually need connections to bank accounts because there's a huge market of underserved bankers here. Asia is not a market you copy and paste your way into. This is proven time and time again. It requires a Southeast Asian perspective. The fact that Grab already won this fight matters. It tells us that the company can survive real competition. Grab today has around 45 million monthly transacting users. That sounds large until you realize it represents only 6% of Southeast Asia's population. The market has still more than 15 times to grow to almost the entire population of Europe. Imagine that everyone in Europe used one super app. Indonesia alone accounts for 50% of Grab's business. Indonesia alone will soon be more than half the size of Europe, a young population, and a rising GDP. So when you compare that to Europe, many European countries are facing population declines, stagnant growth, and negative demographic movement. What does that mean? Consumption is stagnant. The system is fully built and there isn't enough room for growth. Southeast Asia is the complete opposite. Urbanization is still happening. Digital services are still forming from a very tiny base. Large parts of the population are entering the formal economy for the first time. And that's why every young person I know is traveling to Southeast Asia for a cheap and unforgettable holiday. You hear about Donald Trump flying to Korea, meeting Asian leaders, negotiating trade deals and peace talks. Not because of ideology, but because growth is moving. Even trade policy reflects this. His trade tariffs are applied to everyone, not just his friends in Mexico, Canada, and places in Europe. In some cases, it's even worse for the Canadians being friends with Trump. Because it's not about loyalty, it's about where the future demand is rapidly growing. We are now living in a multipolar world, and Asia is one of those growing poles. When people are talking about Southeast Asia, they usually quote GDP numbers, but that's not the right lens to be looking at it. What matters is spending power. In some regions, the internet economy could go from 3 to 5 times larger over the next 5 years, because a large group of people are moving from subsistence spending to discretionary spending. So, what does this mean? Basically, it means that instead of spending to pay for your electricity bills, you're thinking about buying the new iPhone. Maybe you'll even have some cash left over to go for a holiday at the end of this year. That's the reality for a population that is young and has potential. Incomes are rising from a very low base. So even a small flow is enough to make a huge impact. And basic costs stay contained because of cheap goods that are constantly coming from China. This combination means new money doesn't get absorbed by rent or energy. It shows up as food delivery, transport, digital payment, and new financial services. This isn't a cyclical demand, it's a first-time consumption for some of these people, and Grab sits right here, ready to capture all of this new spending. Have you ever wondered what is the use of big data? When people hear big data, they think of a giant machine with numbers that knows everything about everyone. But to these platforms, it's like digital gold. Grab knows where you live, where you work, whether there's a nearby restaurant for you, whether you rely on public transport. When do you usually spend money? Is it right after you get paid? Did you recently break up with your boyfriend? Is that the best time to be pushing shopping ads to you? This is behavioral mapping. And what do companies want? They want access to all of this information. Grab doesn't have to sell this information, they sell it on their platform. This is why platform advertising is so powerful. And that's why when we look at companies like Amazon, they've done this so well in the West. Grab is building the same mechanism in Southeast Asia, where every dollar of ad rent becomes pure profit. And here's one thing that maybe you never thought about. Have you ever noticed how some of these delivery drivers are driving around in very new electric cars? This is not by accident. In many cases, Grab is directly financing them. The loans sit inside the same app that helps them get to work. The vehicles generate income. The income then services these loans that they create. Work creates the repayments. Repayments keep the work going. It is a closed loop. This matters in a region where in countries like Indonesia, roughly 70% of people are underbanked or unbanked. For many of them, their first real encounter with financial services isn't going to a traditional branch at a bank. It's a digital service on your mobile phone. That's why young people today are quickly moving to digital banking. They're doing mobile-first banking because that is exactly what they're used to. This level of convenience quickly becomes habits. So, for us investors looking at the Asian region, looking to find the next Uber or Amazon just as the ground is forming under our feet, Grab is not just a delivery company, it's not just a ride-hailing company, it's not just a fintech company. It becomes a system. It's a company that's made it onto my radar. The selling price of the business today is down almost 70% since 2022. Yet the profits of the business have been steadily rising. And this is exactly what I'm trying to teach on this channel, about being an owner in a business. Owners have a long-term mindset and they ignore the crazy man offering to buy your company for pennies on the dollar. In regions that are still becoming modern, the first platforms that become visible often end up owning the future of this layer of value. If there's one thing you take away from today's episode, I hope it's this. Grab is showing why localization matters. How Asia's growth is being shaped by integrated systems, not singular products. Transport, food, payments, data, and financing all reinforce each other inside singular super apps. For investors, the real opportunity is not these short-term delivery margins, but owning platform companies that are becoming invisible infrastructures as the first-time consumption and digital services scale all across Southeast Asia. So, that's how I see it from where I'm standing. Let me know what you're seeing from your side.